Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Knowledge Leadership Series webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, May 12, 2016. I would now like to hand the conference over to Robin Thompson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Crystal. Greetings, everyone, and on behalf of the team here at BIA, we'd like to wish you a great day and welcome you to our May edition of the Knowledge Leadership Series webinar. This month we have the privilege for our attendees to host the nationally acclaimed ESI Roundtable. Before I get to my favorite part of introducing our guest presenter, I just want to remind everyone to send questions through the chat window, and we'll get to those at the end of the program. If you'd like to direct your question to a specific speaker, just say this one's for Melissa, this one's for Carrie, and they'll get to them. Also, to help us improve the content and quality of our programs, we're going to ask you to complete a short survey as you log out of today's program. For all of those who complete this survey, you'll receive a copy of the slide deck with our thanks. Just a reminder that BIA does not currently certify their webinars for CLE, but attendees will receive a certificate of attendance to use in those jurisdictions which allow self-reporting. Now is my favorite part of today's program. We have with us today Melissa Rogozinski, founder of the ESI Roundtable. After a distinguished career in eDiscovery as a paralegal and educator, Melissa saw an unmet need in the area of eDiscovery education and training and developed the ESI Roundtable to provide quality education for every stakeholder in the eDiscovery process. eDiscovery for the rest of us, which is a phrase synonymous with that program, has a trademark pending. She began the ESI Roundtable in 2008 as a local volunteer effort in Birmingham, and within a couple of years, ESIRT evolved into a regional educational organization, and it has quickly become national in reputation and demand. BIA welcomes the ESI Roundtable to our webinar. And Melissa, with that, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Robin. I'm very humbled and very honored to be a part of your knowledge series. Just to be considered a part of the thought leadership group in this space it's a real privilege to serve our industry this way, and I never could have expected or seen that the Roundtable would come to this. And so having the opportunity now to serve so many across our industry, across the country, and quite frankly to work with people like you and the speakers that we have today, it's the best part of my career. It's why I do what I do. So let me go ahead and get started and introduce everyone to our panelists today. Today, can everybody see the panelist screen? Today we have, I'll be helping to moderate, but we have with us Amy DeCesare from Allied World Insurance, Carrie Fowler from Regions Bank, Allison Skinner, which Allison has quite the pedigree as well. Allison and Carrie and I have been working together for several years, and Amy, as you kind of mentioned earlier, Robin, Amy kind of found her way to us through a network and a grapevine, and actually one of our other advisory board members. And so just some conversations have been happening that corporate in-house departments have been hearing about what we're doing with law firm side and education with the Roundtable. And so it just spurred some discussion about launching a corporate Roundtable. And this program is actually the first in that effort for the Roundtable to officially launch the eCert Corporate Roundtable. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about our agenda. Today, everybody, whether you got it from Robin or from me, you saw the talking points for today's programs, and we try to stay true to that for every program that we do with the Roundtable, so you know exactly what you're going to get and can be prepared. We'll be talking about the knowledge gap between in-house and corporate counsel or outside counsel, competency issues, what statistics are, and I think the audience will be pleased with the statistics because we've actually made some really great improvements over the last few years. Allison will cover that. setting expectations with outside counsel, developing a discovery plan that makes sense, and actually being able to implement that plan and stay consistent by using technology and continuing education. So first of all, why did we actually want to do this program, and why is there being such a push for a corporate ESI Roundtable? Well, what we see, Robin is as much to the corporate audience as the Roundtable has been to the law firm audience, outside counsel, but as in other areas of education with technology and ESI, we're seeing everybody kind of silo themselves. And so corporate and law firm outside counsel have siloed themselves as far as how they deal with this, both with education and having a plan that's defensible. So, but the reality is these silos have to work together. So, we practice law in order to allow businesses and people to operate on a daily basis without litigation. However, when a triggering event does happen, we need to be prepared to protect those individuals and our companies, and that may be through litigation. And of course, the discovery process leads to collecting electronic information, which we now dub eDiscovery. And I think what you'll hear throughout this program is that being 10 years into dealing with this after the federal rules changes, we really need to drop the separation of discovery and eDiscovery, because it's really all the same thing. It's just another format of discovery. So this is a slide that kind of encapsulates where we've come from probably the last 10 years or so. So from the Zubalate case that really kind of set in motion the need for the federal rule amendments in 2006 to last year, we pretty much all know that California State Bar issued an opinion making learning about eDiscovery an ethical obligation, which of course followed the ABA comment back in 2012, making learning about legal technology an ethical obligation. So, and basically what California said is you either need to learn about eDiscovery, you need to hire a consultant if you are not able to learn about it or can't, are not able to get speed quick enough, or if you can't do either of those three things, review the client. And we have seen instances over the last few years that if those obligations are not met, we are seeing people losing clients, we are seeing cases of malpractice, and I have heard of one or two instances where a license has been compromised due to inexperience with eDiscovery and not handling it appropriately. So this is some information and statistics pulled from a couple of recent surveys. Last year, the eDiscovery market just in the United States spent over $10 billion in 2015. $8.2 billion of that was in eDiscovery services. And I separate that because eDiscovery products, like the technology and the software, is different from the actual service that goes into that. So collection, hosting, processing, consulting, and education is all included in services. So the majority of our spend is in eDiscovery services, and you're hearing a lot of comments and seeing a lot of articles probably in the last 12 months where education is really the hot button, and I think it has a pretty good staying power, whereas we've seen some topics like proportionality or predictive coding, they're good tools, but they kind of had a short lifespan as far as how critical they were, but I think we're going to see education have a mainstay for a few years. Extero does a survey, the second annual federal judges survey, and actually one of our federal judges here in Alabama, who's part of the Roundtable, is one of those that gets surveyed every year. 65% of respondents believe that the typical attorney does not possess the subject matter knowledge required to effectively counsel their own clients on eDiscovery. There's a great blame on lack of cooperation between parties, and of course I hear that in conversation with our programs as well. But also, as far as law schools, out of 193 law schools, 124 do not offer eDiscovery courses. And Allison she spearheaded the effort to develop the eDiscovery program at the University of Alabama School of Law, and so she'll be able to talk to us a little bit about that. So with that segue, I am going to hand it over to Allison and let you get started with us and just tell us when you need a slide change, Allison.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate being here today. Thank you for the participants who are on the line. I think this is who we want to avoid. We don't want to be the poor decision eDiscovery Counsel, as we've seen in this series of commercials with Rob Lowe. I hope y'all find a little humor in this slide. But the point is what Melissa mentioned. Last year, California did issue a formal opinion about what is an attorney's ethical duties in handling discovery of electronically stored information. I actually have a law review article coming out, which I know no one reads law review articles anymore, but they do exist. The University of Alabama Journal of Legal Profession talking about this opinion as a cautionary tale. We're going to probably see more and more states look towards this California opinion and say, you know what, we have to have a level of competency among counsel. And I know this group is a mix of practitioners and in-house counsel. And what are those expectations? And we'll talk about those as we go through our program today. So if you'll flip to the next slide. There we go. Here's just the rule on competency. I think most of us know it, but it's nice to have a friendly reminder that we need to acquire that legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary to represent the client. And on the next slide, what Melissa mentioned to you, next slide for me, thank you, is that in 2012 the ABA amended its comments to Rule 1.1, and I think it's important for us to recognize that we as lawyers are responsible to keep abreast of changes in the law and the practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. This is a very broad statement because it's not just talking about eDiscovery, but managing client information in the cloud, online filing, everything related to technology and how we deliver those legal services. But for our purposes today, we need to think in terms of is our team, whether you're with the organization or you're outside counsel, are you confident in the areas that you need to be confident in? And I think the California Ethics Opinion, if you'll go to the next slide, as Melissa mentioned, you really have three choices. You can say, hey, I'm going to acquire this knowledge, I'm going to either hire folks to help me, or I'm going to decline the representation. But if you want to know the baseline of where competency starts, the California Ethics Opinion actually provides 9 factors of what would be baseline knowledge. And I think as we're not going to drill down into each of these for this webinar because it'd probably take a webinar for all 9. But I think it's important if you're in-house to ask yourself, can your outside counsel do these 9 things? So let's just quickly look at them. Number 1, just overall assessing the eDiscovery needs of the case. 2, being able to implement the appropriate preservation procedures. 3, analyzing, knowing the systems, and that requires that the in-house counsel also has its house in order, and we'll talk about information governance here in a minute. Advise the client on options for collection and preservation. Being able to identify custodians, and if we'll flip to the next slide. Can your attorney engage in confident and meaningful meet and confer with opposing counsel and establish that required eDiscovery plan? I think that's a real challenge, and when we hear from the judges' survey about lack of cooperation, I think when we have attorneys who don't know or understand what they're doing, they become less and less cooperative. Number 7, perform data searches, and then we'll talk about that a little later in the webinar. 8, collection, handling collection, and then being able to produce the ESI in an appropriate manner. So that's a baseline, and for those who are in-house, can you meet those 9 criteria? Can your outside counsel meet those 9 criteria? So if we just look generally at the landscape of information governance and where we've come, and then how we as corporations can build an effective eDiscovery team. I think that there's a question asked about, is there a larger trend towards in-house discovery teams partnering with Outside Counsel. There's actually, to answer that question, if it's all right if I go ahead and address it right here, when eDiscovery really hit the scene after the amendments, there was a call to create eDiscovery teams, and it really fell on deaf ears, I think, within the law firms. And then I think it was Cisco actually spent like $26 million defending a lawsuit and handling the eDiscovery, and they said, no more, we're never going to spend this kind of money. We're going to develop our own eDiscovery team. And that was probably one of the first efforts to create eDiscovery teams. I think now it is common practice at the benefit of creating that eDiscovery team. So I hope that addresses that question. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so Cohasset & Associates and ARMA, they did a 2013-2014 Information Governance Benchmarking Survey defining modern information governance programs as the time period for keeping information using a streamlined and simplified retention schedule that applies to all information regardless of location or format. And I think this is really helpful when we look at the survey of where we have come and where we're going and ways we can improve. So our goal is, as we'll see in the next slide, is we're going to be the competent eDiscovery Council and build an effective eDiscovery team. So let's look back of where we have been, and that's in our next slide. Believe it or not, the respondents to this Cohasset & Associates paper, they're the large corporations. In 2003, as we even knew in 2003 that the amendments were coming down, 47% of those respondents did not include electronically stored information in their retention schedules. And by 2009, 35% did not include ESI. And if you actually go back and look at where we were in 2009, there was a big push for a sea change that we had to get our electronic house in order. And I think that there have been some improvements. So if we look at the next slide, by 2011, that number came down, and only 21% of these respondents in this survey, and again these are large corporations, did not include ESI, and by 2013 we were down to 14%. So what we see overall, and this is in the next slide, is we actually had an improvement from right at half of the respondents not including ESI to only 14%. Well, that sounds like we've made great progress. However, Kroll on Track came out with a 2016 corporate risk survey, which you can find online. And their respondents, which included smaller organizations than the one that Cohasset & Associates and ARMA evaluated, 47% of companies still do not have an information governance program in place. All right, well, what does that mean for us on the line is that there is a call for modernization of our records and our records management, our information governance. So the next 4 slides actually give you 4 steps of how you can improve in your own information governance. And this is so important as you are establishing and working with an effective eDiscovery team. So we'll just go through these. What you'll see on the slide is the actual point, and then under number 1 you see 3 columns, and each of the 3 columns are ways to measure and get to your goals. So what you have here from the survey is that although information governance programs were becoming more prevalent to include electronically stored information, implementation elements of how you go about doing that had not been addressed. And so the recommendation for those in-house is compare your foundation components with modern practices, which I know Carrie and Amy are going to talk about, and implement those strategies. A commitment to ongoing communication, training, and change management for all employees. So really what we have seen over time is organizations really weren't concerned about their information. It was for disaster recovery, but we actually have seen in some organizations moving records management under the General Counsel's office because of of eDiscovery. And there has to be communication through all those departments that are stakeholders in this. And using metrics to monitor that progress. All right, so number 2, what we are now seeing as we modernize is that there's a recognition that it's imperative for corporate compliance and risk mitigation that we have effective information governance programs in place to help promote those goals. As you can see in the columns, 1, align cross-functional information governance steering committee with internal governance practices, leverage compliance and risk management relationships and processes. And I wanted to point out, and this is, you can find this statistic also with Fulbright, and they do a litigation survey, but what we saw is half those respondents said they're spending more and more time answering requests for regulatory or enforcement issues, and that seems to be a litigation trend as well. All right, so number 3. So how do we do improvements with ESI? If you don't start now, it's going to be harder and harder to catch up. We're just creating more and more data. So modernize your approach with your life cycle controls, incorporating your IG with applications and systems development, decommissioning, that type of thing, and working and defining new practices. And this is part of helping get to your eDiscovery team. So number 4 on our call for modernization, we found that the respondents have really improved their legal holes, but we actually are seeing over-preservation, which can be a challenge. So coordinating with legal, trying to make sure we don't have excessive preservation. And I like the next slide to drive home this point about our efforts. Here, what we saw is we have over-preservation with paper and email, but we have many areas of improvement where we have with mobile devices or cloud services, or you just don't know. So the important thing is to really work on your information governance. And once you have that house in order, then you're in this position to work with your outside counsel and develop that effective eDiscovery team. All right, I'm going to pass the baton.
Thank you very much, Allison. Carrie, let's go ahead and move into the conversation on what you expect from your outside counsel and some of the plans that you are putting in place currently.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and I'm happy to be here today. Just wanted to give you guys a bit of a sort of a perspective from someone with a career in financial services. I've spent my whole career at 2 banks, the most recent 3 of which have been at Regions Bank in Birmingham, Alabama, and kind of have seen several trends amongst my employers and also with some peers as well. Some eDiscovery tech teams in large corporations sit in information technology and sort of have this dotted line reporting over to legal. And in my experience, I've found that teams work best when the tech resources actually sit in the legal department reporting up to eDiscovery counsel, such as myself. And this allows much better interaction with the legal partners, both internal and outside counsel. And we've just stressed the importance of sort of this competence trend, and I think that really helps our internal and external partners feel that the tech resources are a true sort of extension of their efforts, and we operate at the direction of counsel at all times. And it also allows us to really develop some efficiencies around really project management and how we do our discovery efforts. So the eDiscovery team will dive in at the very beginning of the case and really start a disciplined approach to executing on the eDiscovery efforts, depending on what the matter looks like. And we've seen some really significant benefits from that. As in many large corporate environments, expenses are a primary driver of decision making, and it's really a huge, eDiscovery in general is a huge source of expense, especially for large regulated entities like a bank. And depending on sort of the case and the type of data and the industry, corporations can see eDiscovery efforts being 40 to 60% of the total expenses for the matter. So that sort of highlights the importance of eDiscovery and making sure that your process is efficient to make sure that you're reducing expenses as much as possible and doing things the right way. And we're finding that the reporting and metrics measurement of expenses is really, really huge, and it's driving a lot of decisions around eDiscovery and sort of how we execute the process. And in that light, we're finding that it's really beneficial to shift certain expenses related to discovery from outside counsel who had traditionally been doing the work to a vendor model. So depending on where a corporate client is in the maturity process, you'll find pretty significant savings there. And what we're finding also in addition to the savings is some efficiencies to be gained. So there are just certain tasks within the eDiscovery process that vendors can do more efficiently with better quality and a lower cost than outside counsel had traditionally done. So for example, really just moving along to EDRM, starting with just the processing and hosting of the data, we're finding that the vendor model is the way to go on that. And moving on through document review as well. Again, depending on where you are in the model, I would suggest looking at that if you haven't already looked at a vendor model for certain eDiscovery tasks. And then moving on from that, we are really highly focused on training. So we think there's a huge value in education around eDiscovery because our merits counsel, both internal and external, they have just a tangential understanding of eDiscovery, but because of its importance, we're finding that that education component is really huge. So routine eDiscovery training is very important. We conduct routine, what we call boot camps for our internal and our outside counsel, monthly updates on any changes to our model internally or to the rules or anything else that might be related to eDiscovery. So we're finding that education component has been really huge, and it's just helped us to develop that true partnership with merits counsel, both internal and outside counsel. I would say for as far as interacting with the in-house team and understanding sort of the client's capabilities and preferences, for vendors and outside counsel, it's really just important to understand the level of communication that your client expects. And from the client perspective, it's really important to communicate what those expectations are. So from the internal counsel perspective, it's really important to develop written protocols for certain aspects of the eDiscovery process so that people understand that this is the procedure, this is the process, and a departure from it will require some significant discussion. And I think it's been really helpful to all of our partners, internal and external, to have just a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities and who's doing what and when. And just wanted to stress that. And really just, again, for vendors and outside counsel, stressing the fact that it's just crucially important to communicate with your client in the method and regularity with the routine that they would expect. I think that's all I have, so I'm going to pass the baton unless there are questions.
Thank you very much, Carrie. We're going to go ahead and jump in with Amy, who is new to the roundtable, and I'm going to gush a little bit. I'm really excited to have Amy on board and the way that we came together and were introduced. And the first time I talked to Amy, she really got me fired up about her passion for getting her outside counsel educated and her methods and opportunities and plans to try to effectuate that and to be a part of her plan. It's a privilege, Amy. So, Amy, I'll hand that off to you.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I'm really excited to participate in this. So, and I think Allison and Carrie did a great job, setting the stage what we're dealing with. We've just had a shift in completely the practice of law, and everything has to change, and that's just a fact. We can't continue to deal with the ever-growing mountain of data just by printing it off, because a lot of people are still printing it off. So, so we're here to talk about what do we do with that. We're going to build an in-house team. Well, not all teams look the same, right? I mean, that's what everyone here on the phone wants to know. But I can guarantee, without seeing every corporation that's on the phone today, we're not all dealing with the same issues. So at the heart of it, really when you're building a team and talking about this, a lot of it is process. You have to understand what the workflow is now. Who's touching what are the triggers, what are you currently doing? You may think you understand, but before you build it, you have to really understand where everything is at. And then once you have that, you're going to want to figure out what you want to target first, because in my experience, you can't be successful usually if you try to do everything at once. So Melissa, if you don't mind advancing for me, you could build it, but if nobody calls, what good is it? So that's part of it too. What triggers it? It's that education and everything else. And I'm going to go back to this, but if you advance again for me to the next slide. I like this. If you build it, they will come, because that's really what we're trying to do, right? But we're not in a cornfield in Iowa, so we have to figure out what we're building and the workflow model that we're doing. So, when we're looking at that process and we have the process, which part we're going to do, we have to understand that we may not have to do everything all at once. What do we want to work on first? You can really work on maybe the vendor relationship. Do you have a preferred vendor panel, or one that you can start to even get the metrics? Because if you're looking to build a team, you may not currently know what you're doing. So first get it all in one place. That's usually a great start. And then pick apart the different parts. Maybe you want to take on legal holds first. There's great software. There's great ways to do that. Maybe that's one of the first ones that you feel that you have the resources to tackle. Maybe it's the project management component. You can't do everything yourself, but maybe you're the project manager. You have the vendor who can do your hosting and collecting, but you have the knowledge, and especially if the data is your own and it's your in-house counsel. I'm a Carrie and I'm a claim, so it's not my data. So I have a different issue that I have to deal with. But project management is a great place to insert your knowledge of not only the eDiscovery process, but of where you're keeping the data. So you have a real value add there if you're, you may be building a team of one. So it depends what the resources you have are and how much you can tackle. Because the last thing you really want to do is take on too much at once, I think, and fail. So bit by bit. And you don't have to, one of the great things about processes is that it's something that you can always improve upon. So once you put a process in place, you understand what you're currently doing, improve that, work on the parts you want to do, you can maybe start to look at unbundling services. So I think it's process first, price second, I think, when you're starting to look at these things, in my opinion. Because you could have the best price on paper, but if the process is wrong, it's still going to cost you a fortune. So if you build it, will they come? Well, not if you don't educate them. So you've built the process in place, right? But again, I'm going to ask Melissa to advance the slide. But in this case, knowledge is power, because if people don't know, they have those ethical obligations, both in-house and outside counsel. They're supposed to understand eDiscovery, but the supposed tos and the reality is there's a gap there. So you have to make education and a conversation ongoing. You can't just say, okay, we have an eDiscovery team and wait for the phone to ring, because it probably isn't going to happen. But it's a constant ongoing conversation. You may get questions that don't fit in context. So you may not always want to answer the question asked, but really get to the heart of what the issue is. If you're getting a question on processing, or you're getting a question that's outside the realm, that doesn't seem to quite flow with what they're doing, ask other questions, or make sure they're asking your outside counsel or your inside counsel that you could be working with are asking the questions. Because a lot of times when people don't do eDiscovery, they try to avoid it in all possible ways, unless it smacks them in the face and says, this is eDiscovery. So if you advance for me, Melissa. My staff laughs at me about this one, so feel free. But for those lawyers on the phone, and you remember back to your days of law school, it was Iraq, right? That's what you learned first year of law school when you were doing a law school exam. Issue, rule, application, conclusion, or your analysis conclusion. And you got points. Isn't that great? First time ever you get points for just spotting the issue, even if you're completely wrong about everything else. You just get points for spotting the issue. But that really goes to the practice of what we're doing. If you don't spot the issue, you can't do any of the rest. You can't use this team that we're putting in place. You can't make the improvements. You can't save the cost. You can't get any of the benefits if you don't spot the issue. So I think most of the training, the most effective training I have seen and that we've worked on is putting in place to just spot the issue. Because I don't know that there are people who aren't interested, be it in-house or outside, if you can get them completely on the hook for everything. You know, the retention rate for the knowledge is just not there. They're like, I remember I heard something about that maybe. But I think you can be effective at teaching them to just spot the issue. You know, what's one of the issues? You know, if you're engaging outside counsel, if they're talking discovery, well, how are you going to ask for production, coming in? That could be one of the, they need to spot that. You're dealing with a pretty large, you could be dealing with somebody who's on the larger side, but maybe they're not that sophisticated. So they could be producing it in paper too. I mean, so the level of sophistication out there is, there's such a range on what you're dealing with and what you're getting in. I find and what we're putting in place are guidelines, the litigation guidelines for discovery. And we're not calling it eDiscovery. It's discovery. And we're putting the triggers in place. I've also heard them called at some outside counsel escalation points where they have to escalate to their team. So whatever you decide to term it, but have that in place. If X, then call, and you can decide what those triggers are for what the resources you can support. And put it in different language. So, a lot of times we get, when you're talking ESI, we adopt that entire vocabulary. I find that sometimes, dealing with this, it's more effective to completely strip our vocabulary away. So let's not even talk ESI. Let's not talk gigabytes. We can put it in the different terms, but, let's not talk custodians. How many people are you going to get information from? Okay, where is their information? Is it in their email? Because if you ask these same people, do they have eDiscovery, they'll tell you no. Well, did they have email? Oh yeah, well they have email. So you have to get at it in different ways. And if they have that checklist to go through the litigation guidelines, if you're dealing with inside counsel within your organization, if you're the middle person, if you have a checklist for them to go through and just asking questions on what are some of the things to expect, depending on the type of litigation, again, because I'm in claims, you may not know. It's not our data all the time. So if you're in-house counsel, you may have a better idea one way or another, or you may not. So if you're running the in-house team, but it's not necessarily you're handling the majority of the litigation, then those are some of the things you may want to think of too. And then the constant, reinforcement of the process, constantly going back to it because people forget. You really almost have to get the reputation of being Mr. or Ms. eDiscovery, and get at it in different ways, and make yourself the go-to point person as you start to put this in. But make sure you have the process obviously in place to support that. You don't want to get the rush of oh my gosh, now I have someone who will take this on, if you really don't have the resources to support that. So I think it all flows together. And then the final part that I had on the next slide, it's a roadmap. When you're working with it as a team, and you have that team in place, you've built your team, you figured out what part you're going to do, what part the vendor's going to do, what part outside counsel is going to do. You may be unbundling services. You may have been doing different things. It may flow over time because at some point it may make sense to have a vendor with pricing. The volume makes sense to keep everything with one vendor, but then you may have a volume that could support you unbundling that you could really get competitive with pricing. So it depends. But you have to use the tools efficiently. You have to teach people how to scope. But you also have to get the buy-in, I think. So it's not, there was an earlier question that I thought was great, like, are we trying to replace outside counsel? And maybe some corporations are, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think it's a partnership, and maybe we're bringing a vendor in and expanding that. But the pie, so to speak, how much this stuff is going to cost, can't really change all that much because corporate America, these things can't support it. So we just have to reallocate our resources. But I think the real value for outside counsel in particular who sees it is, you can look at it one of two ways. Like, oh, geez, my client doesn't want to pay me, right? My client doesn't want to pay me to do the stuff that I used to traditionally do. And there is a component of absolutely of cost savings, so that's why we're doing it. But at the heart of it, I think they're doing it because they want to do it better. You can't do it the old way because you can't do it the best way anymore if you do it the old way because you don't have the resources. But the flip side is, this mountain of data got us into this hole or mountain or however you want to call it. But there's really great analytics that go hand in hand with all of this information. And for the litigators on the phone, I think there's two things that give litigators that take your breath away moment in the middle of the night. And the first one is, did I miss a deadline? Did I miss something? There's nothing that's going to wake a litigator up in the middle of the night more than, oh my God, what did I miss? And the second thing right behind that, when you're dealing with your client, whether it's in-house counsel, with whomever you're dealing with, as a litigator, outside counsel, did you tell me everything? I don't have to have the rosy picture. We all know that. Anyone who's ever litigated. Just don't surprise me. Litigators hate surprises. And there's not a litigator out there that hasn't told their client, tell me first. Don't surprise me at the deposition. Don't surprise me in court. I can deal with it if you tell me. And you always hope that that's the case. The data analytics really kind of gives you some security or some assurity in that maybe you do know as much as you can know, or what questions you need to ask, because you can start to see links and trends. Gee, why did these emails fall off, on a certain date? What happened? What do I need to go look for? So you could look at it, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's money out of my pocket, but it's not. It's money still in your pocket, because now you can work smarter. You are not going to have the time to do everything. So if you want to do a linear review or a basic keyword review, you can't. There's too much. At some point it becomes too much. Or your client won't be able to continue to pay for it. But now you can take maybe that same money, maybe a little less, I don't know, it depends on the budget for the matter, but you can do it a lot better. And I don't think there's a lawyer out there that just doesn't, they want to know their case better. And I think that's the power that it brings to them too. So, done right, an in-house team and the training really becomes a win for everybody, in my opinion. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Amy. And I know Robin's going to get to some questions here in a minute, but I wanted to address the audience one more time. I wanted to let everybody know that ESI Roundtable is strictly a CLE, eDiscovery, and legal technology organization. All of our speakers are volunteers. No one gets paid for being a presenter. So we're very agnostic with how we choose topics, how we present content. The vendors are never presenters. That way we know the audience is never going to get a sales pitch or even the stereotype thinking they're going to get one. We work strategically with our vendors when we do have sponsorship opportunities. So I just kind of wanted to let everybody know that ESI Roundtable is agnostic. We're neutral. We try to curate the best of breed resources in additional education outside of our organization, as well as helpful resources that you all need, like a model eDiscovery order, or we have Judge Peck's Rule 502D order on the website, submitting a conference cost, or some foundational things that there's a lot of, probably the majority of our industry still is at a more practical level and needs a lot of help. So I just kind of wanted to address that and make sure everybody was clear on how we work with speakers and vendors and where we stand. We do things a little bit differently, but because there's a particular need for what we do, and I'm going to go ahead and hand that over back to Robin.
Thank you, Melissa and panel. We have quite a few questions, and Amy, I've got a call out for you. Could you speak to how you perform education and training for claims professionals in addition to your in-house and outside counsel?
Sure. So when I first did it, I can tell you what I did and what I think I did wrong and what I'm doing now. So when I first did it, I tried to basically teach them eDiscovery, soup to nuts. You take the EDRM model and all of the things. And I found for the people, especially in claims, that wasn't effective. That wasn't what they needed to know. And if they wanted to know it, they could have really gone and read what I'd read, attended webinars, attended seminars. So the information was out there, but they already deal with so much. That's not the area of expertise. So the types of trainings that I am starting to find most effective are more like fact pattern issue spotting, and it really comes down to learning to spot eDiscovery. Now, again, some of them are clearly obvious, so that's not always the training, and it's a different, if you're dealing with large, terabytes of review, that's probably people know they have it, so you may want to work more on what your problem is, is that they're not understanding what the calling, what their ability to call, collect, or, maybe you want to focus more on the advantage of technology-assisted review, predictive coding. Again, mine is issue spotting. Like, if you don't tell me you have it, I'm not going to find out about it until it goes really wrong on a bill or something like that. So, I figured out what my problem was. But, I figured it out the hard way too, and I probably had people sit through some pretty dry seminars and stuff that they weren't interested in. I thought it was fantastic because I'm interested in it and I do it every day. But over time, I went back to, well, what are they really doing? And what do they need to know? Not what do I want them to know, but what do they need to know? And go from there, because it's not just an academic exercise. So I really do find, for my particular, especially for claims people, and that's what they do. They want to know what drives the cost. Claims people want to know what drives the budget and what's going to affect the budget, so they can ask really good questions. Because usually I find a lot of times when they get budgets in, even the people bringing the budgets, like, they don't understand that a vendor budget's not going to include attorney review time, and that's the biggest driver of cost. So bringing that to their attention, and not getting hung up on like one particular line item. Who is going to call the data best is stuff that they need to know. So teaching them what to focus on, what to ask questions about, and what should kind of put their antenna up that they may have a problem there. So that's what I focus on.
Amy, thank you. Carrie, Amy, I'd like to pose this question to you. I attended a general counsel panel at the Legal Marketing Association, and the focus of that was talking about how they buy and what they look for. They were asked to rank 1, 2, 3, or 3, 2, 1. How do they rate the following? Which is of what weight do they give most importance, rather? Price, quality, customer experience. Which of those three do you place the most importance on, and which do you place the least importance on?
This is Carrie. Great question. I would say quality absolutely is first, and a close second. And customer experience to me kind of goes along with quality. So I would say, price would fall in there too, but definitely the quality. Yeah. And also I would say price too for our vendors. I mean, they're all relatively comparable on price, so definitely quality and the experience with the team.
I'm so glad to hear you build in customer experience into quality. I think that's long overdue, and I'm glad to see you build that into your answer. Thank you both. With the next year being the 25th anniversary of the DuPont model, I've seen mid and small-sized corporations bringing discovery in-house via managed services or another route. Are you seeing more of the need to educate directed towards corporations, and do you think that bringing this process in-house, not just for the big corporations but smaller ones, are affecting what may be the perceived tension between law firm teams and corporate teams? And I know that's a bifurcated question. I'm opening it up to all of you.
This is Allison. I can try to address your question. Here's what I think happened with the law firms is the management of law firms would not invest in the technology required to support the needs of the client. And I have seen, I worked for a national client early 2000s. We knew it would take a decade to get compliant with the 2006 amendments, and we were already training outside counsel years before the rules actually went into effect. And having watched law firms who try to service the client in-house, then having vendor-based, and then corporations bringing it in-house, I think it's all about saving money and being most efficient. And for the law firms who didn't keep up on technology internally, I think they lost clients that way, and it also drove organizations to say, wait a minute, we know our information better than anybody. We can do it very effectively and efficiently. So for those law firms who are willing to make the investment in technology, I think they were able to maintain those relationships. But the law firms who didn't, I think they got a little left behind. Someone might want to
Yeah, and I think it all depends on the size of the litigation, the small to mid-term size. I actually really like the vendor model, and depending what the resource you have, where the in-house, if you're small to mid-size, you may not be able to have the resources to do it yourself, but you can really take control of the project management component part of it perhaps, or really steer the ship of how this is going between outside and inside counsel, and make sure you're the point person on all this to control it. So there's a real value add, and there's a flip side. I always get a little worried about there are firms that what it means to bring it in-house. For the law firm side, the knowledge, absolutely. I love when they have the knowledge practice groups and they're investing in the education in-house with their attorneys. But when they have that captured vendor model, that always makes me a little nervous, because are they really ready to invest in the most current tools? Are they really ready to invest in the best security? When we're going to pick a vendor, you want to vet a lot of things, but not just their price. Like, how are you keeping the data? How are you securing the data? And I wonder, this is more, are people who are using that in-house, are the law firms held to the same standard that you hold a vendor to? So those are just some considerations.
If I could add to that I've been teaching eDiscovery since 2010, and I used to, in my early classes, I would teach the law students that there are these job opportunities with vendors in this space, and it was non-traditional from going in with a law firm. In 2014, I started describing going into a law firm as non-traditional and going with legal services vendors as the traditional route for finding employment in litigation. So that's a very different change in perspective. And I think a lot of that has been driven with our in-house counsel being a supply chain manager and knowing how to find the right resources and the most efficient cost associated with those services.
This is Melissa. I kind of want to jump in before we finish this. And first I'm going to say is, I agree with everything that Carrie, Allison, and Amy are saying. I've seen the same thing. We've all worked together for a long time, but I see the same thing in my survey responses when we do programs. Price is important, but it's never been the number one factor for why people make decisions to work with a service provider. It's always about their product knowledge and their customer service. And price is always third every time, and I've been doing this for about 8 years now. The other thing I would say, echo what Allison just said, is that I too say similar things to our audiences and our attendees, and I have seen certainly in the last few years people making job changes to vendors, or I've seen legal support staff also making changes. I've had firm administrators and human resources call me instead of going to a recruiter and ask, hey, I need a tech-savvy paralegal. Can you help me find one? I had one firm administrator that even went so far as to tell me, I will pluck a tech-savvy paralegal from another firm and give her a pay raise. And there was one person I knew in that town that qualified. I called her up. She interviewed, and within 3 days she had the job and a pretty significant pay raise. So, and then to the original question about how eDiscovery is being handled in-house and versus outside counsel, I'll echo what Amy said too, and I appreciate that Amy really pushed forward their project management component. I've been hearing the same thing for 3 years as the answer to that question is it really depends on the volume of litigation that a corporation is handling, which lends to how much process and how much of a detailed defensible process they need to have on a regular basis. And that, along with project management, is really what the deciding factor is between whether corporate counsel pulls in the decision-making over ESI, eDiscovery, and vendor selection, or if they leave that to outside counsel. And I'm still seeing a very healthy balance. I've heard plenty of vendors say that, hey, it's all going corporate, but it's not. And I don't think it ever will. There's going to be a balance, and I think what we're seeing this year in 2016 is a settling and a balance of counsel, all of these things that we've been trying to learn, trying to wrap our arms around for the last 10 years to jubilate to the federal rules. I see 2016 as kind of that year that everything's settling out and we can just grab onto the reins and now we can drive this. It's not driving us anymore. We can drive it.
Yeah, and this is Carrie. I just wanted to add from the in-house perspective, what I've sort of observed is that nobody knows the data better than internal parties in a corporation. So I've found that if you're in a corporation of any size that has any volume of litigation and big data to go with it, I think it's been helpful to internalize the function of actually analyzing which data to collect and then going and doing that data collection. And that sort of, it's not unusual for us to save, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the initial ask for the data preservation just by taking a disciplined approach to identifying the data that we believe to be responsive to a matter. So, with that kind of a cost saving, you can pretty quickly justify adding internal resources. So that's one observation that I would have liked to have made to the discussion of internalizing certain topics, certain tasks.
Melissa, panel, I've got one final question, and it's a friend of both the ESI Roundtable and our Knowledge Leadership Series, so I'm going to say it just the way he said it. Rogo and panel. The technology is as usually trending 2 to 3 years, if not more, ahead of the law for the most part. Do you find the law is trying to keep up a bit more, i.e. with predictive coding, concept clustering, email threading?
This is Melissa Rogo. Now everybody on the webinar is my friend, and you can call me Rogo too. So, because Rogozinski, I live in Alabama, and apparently Rogozinski is not very southern, and no one down here can pronounce it, so they call me Rogo. So the answer to that question is I do not see that the law is trying to keep up with